Growing up as the youngest of 4 children in the Martinez family meant learning your place early. While my brothers Kevin, Miguel and Danny were groomed for important work, I was always the one expected to serve others. At family gatherings, I cleared plates while they discussed business strategy. During holiday dinners, I worked in the kitchen while they sat at the adults' table planning the future of Martinez family restaurants. Emma's the practical one, Mom would explain to visitors, using her code word for not brilliant. She'll always have work in the service industry. The family restaurant chain that started with my grandparents' taco truck had grown to 12 locations across Texas, and everyone assumed I'd spend my life taking orders and wiping tables while my brothers handled the real business. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something else entirely. While they saw a community college graduate working double shifts, I'd actually been running a series of increasingly successful online ventures since age 16. My e-commerce platform for artisan crafts had been acquired for $2.3 million when I was 22. My food delivery app patent had been licensed to 3 major companies for $8.7 million. By 25, I controlled a network of investments worth over $40 million. But to my family, I was still just Emma the waitress who didn't understand real business. The breaking point came during our quarterly family meeting in January. Kevin had called everyone to discuss the major expansion he'd been planning for months, 5 new locations that would double our restaurant footprint. The conference room at our flagship location buzzed with excitement as my brothers spread architectural plans across the mahogany table. "This expansion represents the future of Martinez family restaurants," Kevin announced, adjusting his expensive tie. He'd positioned himself as the family business heir apparent after getting his MBA from UT Austin. "We're talking about $3.2 million in investment, but the projected returns are substantial." Miguel, our supposed financial genius with his accounting degree, nodded enthusiastically. "The numbers look solid. We can secure the funding through our existing credit lines and the cash reserves we've built up." Danny, the operations expert, pointed to locations on the map. "I've already scouted these sites. Prime real estate in growing neighborhoods. We could have all 5 locations operational within 18 months. I sat quietly in the corner, having learned long ago that my input wasn't welcome at these meetings. Officially, I was there because I held a small percentage of company stock, a token amount given to all family members when the business incorporated. What they didn't realize was that my small percentage had grown significantly over the years through careful acquisitions made through shell companies and trusts. Mom presided over the meeting like a corporate queen, her designer blazer and perfectly styled hair reflecting the success she credited entirely to her sons. "This expansion will cement our legacy," she declared. "Finally, we'll be competing with the major chains." Kevin pulled up detailed financial projections on his laptop. "The initial investment breaks down to $640,000 per location. We've got the real estate locked in, the contractors selected, and the equipment suppliers lined up. All we need is final approval to move forward." "What about market research?" I asked quietly, genuinely curious about their planning process. The room fell silent. Miguel rolled his eyes. "Emma, this isn't really your area of expertise." "We've done extensive market analysis," Kevin said dismissively. "This is sophisticated business strategy, not order-taking." Mom leaned forward with that patient smile she reserved for explaining simple concepts to simple people. "Business decisions need real intelligence, Emma. Not waitress-level thinking like yours." She gestured toward my brothers. "These are the minds that built our success." Kevin and Miguel laughed openly. Danny smirked while shuffling through more expansion documents. "Maybe stick to taking orders," Miguel added. "That's what you're good at." The casual cruelty stung, but I'd developed a thick skin over the years. "You're absolutely right," I said, standing up slowly. "I don't really understand this level of business complexity. I'll leave you to handle the important stuff." "Smart choice," Kevin said without looking up from his financial projections. "We'll fill you in on the basics later." I smiled and walked toward the door. "I'm sure you'll make the right decisions. You always do." As I left the conference room, I could hear them immediately dive back into expansion planning, their voices animated with excitement about the future they were building without me. Kevin was already calling contractors to finalize timelines. Miguel was calculating cash flow projections. Danny was scheduling site visits for the following week. I drove home to my modest apartment, the one my family thought I could barely afford on my waitress salary. They had no idea that I'd actually bought the entire building 2 years earlier as an investment property. The monthly rent payments from my neighbors more than covered all my living expenses, but maintaining the illusion of financial struggle had become second nature. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing the quarterly reports from my investment portfolio. My holdings had grown substantially over the past year, including some acquisitions I'd made through my attorney that my family would find very interesting. Among my various investments was a 78% controlling stake in Martinez Family Restaurants, acquired gradually over 5 years through a series of carefully structured transactions. It had started when the family business needed capital for equipment upgrades 3 years earlier. Kevin had approached several investors, but the terms were unfavorable. Through my lawyer, I'd offered financing through a silent partnership structure, allowing the family to maintain operational control while I provided the necessary capital. The arrangement was so discreet that even our family accountant wasn't fully aware of the ownership structure. Over time, as the business needed additional funding for renovations, equipment, and working capital, my investment had grown. Each transaction was documented properly and filed with the state, but the complex ownership structure kept my identity hidden behind corporate entities. To my family, I was still just a minority stockholder with no real voice in business decisions. But tomorrow's expansion plan would require more than their available credit lines and cash reserves. The $3.2 million investment they'd planned would need approval from the majority shareholder, which, unknown to them, was me. The next morning arrived crisp and clear. I was scheduled for an early shift at our main restaurant, serving breakfast to the regular customers who'd watched me grow up. Mrs. Rodriguez ordered her usual coffee and churros, asking about my family with genuine warmth. "Your brothers are doing so well with the business expansion," she said proudly. "Your parents must be so proud of all their successful children." I smiled and refilled her coffee. "They're definitely excited about the future." Around 10:30, I was clearing tables when Kevin burst through the restaurant doors, his face flushed with panic. Miguel followed close behind, clutching his phone like a lifeline. Danny brought up the rear, looking confused and worried. "Emma," Kevin called out sharply. "We need to talk. Now." I set down the coffee pot and walked over calmly. "What's going on?" "Our accountant just called," Miguel said, his voice tight with stress. "Apparently, the expansion can't proceed without approval from some silent partner we've never heard of." Kevin was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "This makes no sense. We've been planning this expansion for months. We have the funding secured. How can some mystery investor just block our entire plan?" I wiped my hands on my apron, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served me well over the years. "That does sound complicated. What did the accountant say exactly?" "He said the silent partner owns 78% of the company," Danny explained, looking genuinely bewildered. "According to the ownership documents, any major expenditure over $500,000 requires their written approval." Kevin slammed his fist on the nearest table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. "This is ridiculous. We built this business. We run every aspect of operations. How can some faceless investor have veto power over our decisions?" Miguel was scrolling frantically through his phone, probably trying to reach their lawyer. "The accountant said all the documentation is legitimate. Filed with the state, everything properly recorded. But the ownership structure is so complex that he never realized how much control this silent partner actually has." "What I don't understand," Danny said slowly, "is how we never knew about this. I mean, 78%. That's massive. How does someone accumulate that much ownership without us knowing?" I continued wiping down tables, listening to their increasingly frantic discussion. "Maybe they need more information from your accountant? Sometimes these business structures are complicated." Kevin whirled around to face me, his frustration boiling over. "Emma, this is serious business crisis management. Can you please just focus on your tables and let us handle this?" "Of course," I said quietly. "I'm sure you'll figure it out." But their crisis was just beginning. Over the next hour, their phone calls multiplied. The lawyer confirmed that the ownership structure was legally binding. The bank explained that the loan approval was contingent on majority shareholder consent. The contractors wanted to know if they should proceed with site preparation or put everything on hold. Mom arrived around noon, her usual composed demeanor cracking under pressure. "This is a disaster," she announced, surveying her 3 sons huddled around their phones and laptops. 20 years building this business and some stranger can just shut down our growth? "We're trying to find out who this silent partner is," Kevin explained, his voice strained. "The lawyer says the ownership is held through multiple corporate entities and trusts. It could take days or weeks to trace back to the actual person. Miguel looked up from his laptop. The accountant found some of the original investment documents. This person has been providing capital for years. Equipment purchases, renovations, working capital loans. Every time we needed funding, they provided it through these shell companies. Well, obviously we need to contact them immediately, Mom declared. They need to understand that this expansion is crucial for our family business. We'll explain the situation and get their approval. Danny shook his head. The lawyer says all communication has to go through their corporate attorneys. We can't just call them directly. Everything has to be formal written requests. I continued my shift, serving lunch customers while my family's panic intensified around me. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent the morning dismissing my intelligence, and now they were frantically trying to understand a business structure I'd carefully built over 5 years. Around 2 o'clock, I took my scheduled break and stepped outside to make a phone call. My corporate attorney, Margaret Chin, answered on the second ring. Emma, I assume you're calling about the Martinez family restaurant situation? Yes. I think it's time to reveal the ownership structure. Can you set up a meeting for this afternoon? Absolutely. I'll call their lawyer and arrange for a conference at our office at 4 o'clock. Should I prepare the full disclosure documents? Everything. Ownership percentages, investment timeline, the complete financial picture. They want to understand who their silent partner is, so let's show them. Margaret's voice carried a hint of amusement. This should be interesting. I'll have all the documentation ready. I returned to work for the rest of my shift, watching my family's stress levels rise as they fielded more calls from contractors, suppliers, and investors. Their confident expansion plans had crumbled in a matter of hours, replaced by the reality that they weren't actually in control of the business they thought they owned. At 3:30, I changed out of my uniform and into the professional attire I kept in my car for occasions like this. The transformation from waitress to businesswoman was something I'd perfected over the years, part of maintaining the careful balance between my public identity and my private success. Kevin looked surprised when he saw me approaching their table in business attire. Emma, what are you doing? I'm coming to the meeting with your silent partner. Miguel frowned. This isn't really something you need to be involved in. It's complicated business stuff. I think I should be there, I said simply. I might learn something. Mom sighed dramatically. I suppose it won't hurt to have you observe. Maybe you'll finally understand how real business works. The drive to Margaret's law office was tense. Kevin drove while Miguel called ahead to confirm the meeting details. Danny reviewed their expansion plans one more time, hoping to present a compelling case to the mysterious investor. Mom practiced her speech about family legacy and business vision. Margaret's office occupied the top floor of downtown Austin's most prestigious business tower. The receptionist ushered us into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The polished mahogany table was surrounded by leather chairs, and the walls displayed Margaret's impressive collection of corporate law awards. The silent partner should be here shortly, Margaret announced as she arranged documents around the table. In the meantime, let me review the ownership structure that seems to have surprised you. She spread out a series of charts and legal documents. Martinez Family Restaurants is currently owned 78% by Estrella Holdings, 12% by the Martinez Family Trust, and 10% distributed among individual family members. Kevin studied the documents intently. So Estrella Holdings is the silent partner that's been providing our funding? Correct. Estrella Holdings has invested approximately $12.8 million in the restaurant chain over the past 5 years, in exchange for majority ownership and operational oversight rights. Miguel looked confused. But we've been running the business independently. No one from Estrella Holdings has ever interfered with our decisions. Margaret smiled. The ownership structure allows for operational independence as long as major expenditures stay below $500,000. Your expansion plan exceeds that threshold, which triggers the approval requirement. Mom leaned forward, her business instincts kicking in despite her confusion. We need to understand who we're dealing with. Can you tell us about the principal of Estrella Holdings? She'll be here shortly to explain everything herself, Margaret said, checking her watch. In fact, she should be arriving right about now. The conference room door opened and I walked in carrying my briefcase and the coffee I'd picked up from the lobby cafe. Kevin blinked in confusion. Emma, did you get lost looking for the bathroom? I set my briefcase on the table and took the seat across from my family. Actually, I'm exactly where I need to be. Margaret began distributing documents to each family member. Let me introduce you to the principal and sole owner of Estrella Holdings, Emma Martinez. The silence that followed was profound. Miguel stared at the ownership documents in front of him, his mouth slightly open. Danny's expansion plans slipped from his fingers and scattered across the polished table. Mom's practiced composure cracked completely, her confident smile frozen in disbelief. Kevin was the first to find his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. This has to be a mistake. Margaret continued in her professional tone. Ms. Martinez has been the majority owner of Martinez Family Restaurants since 2019, when her cumulative investments exceeded the 50% threshold. Her ownership increased to 78% following the equipment upgrade financing in 2021. I opened my briefcase and removed my own set of documents. I've been providing capital for the business through various investment vehicles for years. Every equipment purchase, every renovation, every time you needed working capital, that funding came from my companies. Miguel was frantically flipping through the legal documents. But you work as a waitress. You can barely afford rent. How could you possibly have $12.8 million to invest in anything? The waitressing is just part-time work, I explained calmly. I've been running several successful businesses for years. My investment portfolio generates more than enough income to support these ventures. Danny looked like he was trying to solve an impossible math problem. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. You work double shifts to make ends meet. The apartment building actually belongs to one of my real estate companies. The car is reliable and economical. And I work at the restaurant because I enjoy it, not because I need the money. Mom finally found her voice, though it was barely above a whisper. Emma, are you telling us that you own our business? I met her gaze steadily. I'm the majority shareholder, yes. Though you've all been doing an excellent job with day-to-day operations. The business has grown significantly under your management. Kevin was shaking his head repeatedly, as if he could make this reality disappear through sheer denial. This doesn't make sense. Yesterday you were asking basic questions about our expansion plans. You said you didn't understand business complexity. I was curious about your market research and financial projections, I clarified. The expansion plan itself is interesting, but there were some aspects I wanted to understand better before approving such a significant investment. Margaret interjected smoothly. Ms. Martinez requested this meeting because your expansion plan requires majority shareholder approval. She wants to review the proposal directly with the management team. The next hour was surreal. My brothers, who had spent the morning mocking my intelligence, now found themselves presenting their business plan to me for approval. The expansion that they'd assumed was a foregone conclusion suddenly required them to justify every detail to the family member they'd consistently dismissed. Kevin's presentation was thorough but nervous. He explained the market analysis, the site selection process, and the projected returns, but his usual confidence had evaporated. Every few minutes, he would glance at me with an expression of confused disbelief. Miguel's financial projections were solid, though he stumbled several times while explaining concepts he'd assumed I wouldn't understand. The revenue forecasts and cash flow analyses that he'd presented so confidently the day before now seemed uncertain under my scrutiny. Danny's operational timeline was detailed and realistic, but he kept pausing to clarify points that yesterday he would have dismissed as too complicated for me to grasp. Throughout their presentation, I asked detailed questions about market saturation, competitive analysis, and risk mitigation strategies. Questions that revealed I understood business complexity far better than they'd ever imagined. When they finished, I reviewed their documents carefully. The expansion plan was actually quite good, aggressive but achievable with solid financial backing and realistic timelines. My family might have underestimated my intelligence, but they hadn't overestimated their own business abilities. This is a strong proposal, I said finally. The market analysis is thorough, the financial projections are conservative but optimistic, and the operational plan is realistic. I'm prepared to approve the expansion funding. Relief flooded their faces, but it was mixed with continued bewilderment. Kevin leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. So we can proceed with the expansion? Yes, with some modifications. I want quarterly progress reports directly from the management team. Major supplier contracts should be reviewed by our legal team before signing. And I want to be included in all strategic planning meetings going forward. Mom was still processing the fundamental shift in family dynamics. Emma, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling financially? I considered the question carefully. Because it allowed me to understand how the business really functioned. If you'd known I was the major investor, would your decision-making process have been different? Would you have been as honest about challenges and opportunities? Miguel was nodding slowly, beginning to understand. You were protecting your investment by staying invisible. Partially. But also protecting the family dynamic. You're all excellent at what you do. Kevin's strategic vision, Miguel's financial management, Danny's operational expertise. The business succeeded because of your abilities, not despite them. Danny looked confused. But why work as a waitress if you didn't need the money? Why let us treat you like the family member who wasn't smart enough for business? I finished. Because it gave me insight into every level of operations. I understand our customer base, our service challenges, our employee concerns. That perspective is valuable for strategic decision-making. Kevin was still struggling with the revelation. I don't understand how you built this kind of wealth without any of us knowing. I pulled out another set of documents from my briefcase. My first successful venture was an e-commerce platform I built in high school. It was acquired for $2.3 million when I was 22. I used that capital to fund additional technology ventures, real estate investments, and eventually the restaurant investments. Margaret added, Ms. Martinez has built a diversified portfolio worth approximately $43 million. The restaurant chain represents about 30% of her total holdings. The room fell silent again as my family absorbed this information. Yesterday's family hierarchy had been completely inverted. The daughter they dismissed as lacking intelligence was actually the most financially successful member of the family. The waitress they'd patronized was actually their boss. But the most shocking realization was still coming. Miguel was reviewing the ownership documents again when his expression changed. Emma, according to these dates, you became majority owner in 2019. That's 4 years ago. Yes. Kevin's voice was tight. You've been the controlling shareholder for 4 years and you never said anything? You let us make plans, set strategies, celebrate successes, thinking we were building our own business. I met his gaze directly. You were building your own business. Ownership and management are different things. You've been running operations, making daily decisions, growing the customer base, managing employees. The business succeeds because of your work, not because of my investment. Mom was quiet for a long moment before speaking. But you could have stopped any decision we made. Changed any strategy. Overruled any plan. I could have. But why would I interfere with success? The business has grown substantially under your management. Revenue is up 340% since 2019. Customer satisfaction scores are excellent. Employee turnover is below industry average. You've been doing everything right. Danny was shaking his head in amazement. So when we celebrated hitting $2 million in revenue last year, I was celebrating too. Your success is my success. We're family and we're business partners even if you didn't know it. The meeting concluded with practical arrangements. Margaret would handle the legal documentation for the expansion approval. I would transfer the necessary funding to cover the $3.2 million investment. Kevin, Miguel, and Danny would proceed with their expansion timeline, but with new reporting requirements and strategic oversight. As we gathered our documents and prepared to leave, Mom approached me privately. Emma, I owe you an apology. We all do. The things we said yesterday, the way we've treated you over the years. We were wrong about so many things. I looked at her thoughtfully. You weren't wrong about my abilities. You just didn't have complete information about what I was doing with them. But we should have recognized your intelligence, your business sense, your contributions. Instead, we dismissed you as someone who couldn't understand real business. I smiled, the same calm smile I'd maintained throughout years of family meetings where my input wasn't wanted. The business speaks for itself. We've built something successful together, even if you didn't realize I was part of building it. Kevin approached as we reached the elevators. Emma, I have to ask, why reveal yourself now? You could have stayed silent, approved the expansion through your lawyer, continued being the invisible majority owner. Why change the dynamic? I considered his question as the elevator arrived. Because the expansion represents a new phase for the business. 12 locations growing to 17, potentially 25 within 5 years. That level of growth requires different strategic coordination. It was time for the management team to know who they're really working with. The ride down to the parking garage was quiet, each family member lost in their own thoughts about how fundamentally their understanding of family dynamics had changed in one afternoon. As we reached our cars, Miguel called out, Emma? Tomorrow's staff meeting at the restaurant. Should we tell everyone about the ownership change? I shook my head. Nothing changes for the employees. You're still management, I'm still part-time waitstaff. The only difference is that now you know who signs the bigger checks. Danny laughed, a sound that contained equal parts amazement and relief. This is going to take some getting used to. The expansion approval will be processed tomorrow, I said, getting into my Honda. Congratulations on developing such a solid growth plan. I'm looking forward to seeing it succeed. As I drove home to my modest apartment that I actually owned, I reflected on the day's revelations. Tomorrow I would return to taking orders and serving coffee, but with a fundamental shift in family dynamics. My brothers would still run daily operations, but they would never again dismiss my intelligence or business acumen. Mom would still preside over family meetings, but she would never again assume that success belonged exclusively to her sons. The expansion would proceed as planned, funded by investments they now knew came from their sister. The family business would continue growing, but with new understanding about who had been providing the capital for that growth all along. And I would continue doing what I'd always done, building success quietly, strategically, and with the patience that comes from knowing that competence speaks louder than credentials, results matter more than recognition, and sometimes the most powerful position is the one no one sees coming. The next morning, I put on my waitress uniform and returned to work, serving coffee to customers who still saw me as the same Emma who had grown up taking orders. But now, when my family held their business meetings in the back room, they would never again assume that I didn't understand what real business looked like. As I had built it,